Greetings, everyone.
What's up, New York?
Peace to you all.
Welcome back, Dana Club.
Welcome to another episode of Praiseworthy Reviews, where we go through video games to see if they're excellent and commendable. Today, we will be reviewing Insomniac's Marvel's Spider-Man 2, the sequel to the 2018 entry and the Miles Morales entry. As usual, we'll be evaluating the game based on 5 criteria: fun factor, educational value, cultural value, spiritual value, and cost. For context, prior to this review, I have finished Marvel's Spider-Man Remastered and Marvel's Spider-Man Miles Morales, and I finished this game to the credits. I didn't start playing until after patch 2 was released, so while I know that many people had technical difficulties, the game only crashed twice in my entire playthrough, although I'm pretty sure one time was related to me recording. While the performance isn't quite as good as Spider-Man Remastered and the frame rate does drop in a few sequences, as you can see from the footage, it was quite playable. There are times when the cutscenes load too slowly, which is not a big deal, but sometimes things load incorrectly and cause you to be unable to progress. This was a little surprising, but restarting from the last checkpoint usually fixed it for me. I also want to state that this review assumes that you have played Marvel's Spider-Man or Spider-Man Remastered, as well as the Miles Morales entry, and so I will make some gameplay comparisons. So if you have not played at least the first Marvel Spider-Man, my personal recommendation is that you just go purchase and play Remastered first. So without further ado, let's jump in. In Marvel's Spider-Man 2, players play as Peter Parker and Miles Morales, punching, kicking, swinging, and now gliding their way through New York. The core gameplay mechanics, as you might guess, are very similar to the first 2 games: puzzles and minigames, exploration, and of course, combat. There are a wide variety of puzzles and minigames, many of which are science-themed. There are some chemical analyses puzzles and plant gene modification puzzles, none of which felt particularly creative. While they didn't wow me, they also didn't overstay their welcomes, so to me they provided just the right amount of relaxing downtime from the combat. There were some investigation sequences looking for clues in the typical open-world fashion to follow a trail, but surprisingly this sort of rubbed me the wrong way. I always felt like I was looking in the wrong place, but maybe that's just a me problem. There are quite a number of minigames that made sense in the context of the story, but were a little bit unusual. Still, I enjoyed their inclusion. The exploration aspects of the game are the same as in previous games. There are the usual crimes, which I mostly ignored, and open-world collectibles, like tech parts and spider bots. There are still bases you can take down and other things to pick up. I felt like overall more of the optional content contained stronger narrative integration, and I really liked the Flame missions, the Brooklyn Visions Academy FNSM missions, and the Harlem Museum missions in particular. The game contains a few sequences where you don't play as either of the Spider-Men. I generally liked playing as civilian Peter and Miles doing civilian stuff, or limited Spider-Man stuff, but not really MJ. I understand from a narrative reason why they include MJ's sequences, but it really messed with my suspension of disbelief that she could evade so many of these hunters.
Training with Sable paid off sooner than I'd hoped.
Combat is still the very solid Batman Arkham-style flow, with Spider-Man's usual melee attacks, web yanking, web shooting, and spider-sense dodging. Both Spider-Men still feel the same as ever, characters that can be taken down if they are careless, but are generally highly skilled and highly motivated superheroes. I played with a controller, and I felt like the gadgets were equipped and mapped in ways that felt more intuitive and easier to use than in both past games. In fact, the game seems to expect you to use gadgets and powers constantly. Peter and Miles feel equally powerful, which is good, but in some ways they move and feel a little too samey now. But I guess that's a minor nitpick. There's still these similar progression systems from the past, with skills being upgraded through gaining experience and leveling up. These abilities are Miles' Venom powers and Peter's different spider arm upgrades. There are also different gadgets, including the standard web shooter, the upshot, the ricochet web shooter, and others. The upgrades for these do feel substantial, arguably more than the skill upgrades, which are upgraded through the various collectibles. I don't remember there being explicit suit tech upgrades in either of the previous games. The suit tech upgrades are basically just passive upgrades to health, damage, focus, and traversal, but I welcome their inclusion. Overall, I generally viewed almost all of the gameplay changes as improvements to the already very entertaining Insomniac Spider-Man formula, and therefore I'm going to give the game 5 stars for fun factor. As far as motor skills are concerned, there is some challenge in development. Compared with Souls-likes or Metroidvanias, Spider-Man 2 is not really a difficult game. I played on Spectacular, which wasn't that hard most of the time, because the Spider-Men are just so powerful now with all their abilities and gadgets that I rarely died in normal combat. However, the game is not exactly easy either. I I would still die in boss combats due to the boss's iframes during some animations that were cool and cinematic, but not intuitive in the way that they were invincible, as well as the introduction of attacks that can be parried but not dodged. The puzzles were all too easy, but I guess that's better than them being too hard, even if it wasn't challenging. The scaffolding and introduction of new gameplay elements was generally well done. It never felt overwhelming. What I really appreciated about this game in terms of educational value, however, was the factual knowledge that could be learned. Yes, there's some of the usual sci-fi pretend science, but there's also real science introduced in the game, much more than in previous games, in my opinion. For me personally, I learned a little bit about fulgurites and bee wolves. There were also some great mentions of Mendel's genetics, as well as some artistic analysis.
Well, somebody remembered a thing or two from AP Art.
I also appreciated learning about Charlie Parker and some of the Harlem jazz musicians. The only one I really knew before that was Miles Davis, who Miles is named after. Overall, I thought they did a great job of making learning fun and positive, and so I think they do deserve 5 stars for educational value. As with the previous games, Spider-Man 2 looks fantastic. The city looks like New York, the suits look heroic, and the models and textures all look stunning. There's some weirdness with the hair, and I actually prefer the MJ model from the first game, but overall everything looks stunning, especially the villains and the Spider-Man. Animations also continue to look great. So many of the cutscenes really show off what the Spider-Man can do, and the combat animations continue to rival the best sequences in the movies. The soundtrack was good, and it was suitably heroic when it needed to be, but honestly, it felt a little generic. It's not bad at all, but it almost fades into the background, being what you would expect from a Spider-Man game. Yuri Lowenthal and Najee Jeter are still excellent in their reprisals.
Let's give him a drink instead!
Delivering us likable protagonists that can make their signature Spider-Man quips while still conveying the more vulnerable facets of the superheroes.
It's worse than getting fired. Telling your girlfriend that you got fired.
As far as the narrative goes, the plot of Spider-Man 2 takes a little while to get going, and the pacing sometimes feels a little weird with 2 protagonists, but after a while it was able to get me invested. There's nothing special about the setting, being just New York in a Marvel universe, but I appreciated the new areas of Queens, Brooklyn, and Coney Island, and I also liked both schools and the Harlem area. The characterizations of Peter, Miles, and Harry were all really well done, and I think the writers did an outstanding job of showing some of the Spider-Man's flaws without taking away their strong moral compasses. Regarding its cultural impact, Marvel Spider-Man 2 had already sold 11 million copies on PlayStation as of 2024, and it was released to Steam in January of 2025. While there have been no official confirmations of a sequel, it has been implied by developers that there could be a Venom spin-off that sets up a 3rd game, meaning that this game may be quite integral to understanding 2 more games.
The final chapter.
As a work of art and considering its cultural impact, I'm going to assign Marvel Spider-Man 2 5 stars for its cultural value. There's some negative content, but none of it feels too explicit. There's some violence, of course, with some blood, but none of it is too graphic, although there are some intense horror-type images. Drugs and alcohol are not ever used, although it may be implied that the bad guys have some. There was a little bit of vulgar language, but it wasn't too bad. There's no nudity or sex, but there are some progressive values in sexuality. I had read that there was some woke stuff, but I thought that people were maybe just being dramatic. However, the game is a little bit more progressive than I expected. While it's not Veilguard bad, it's there. There's some weird gender-neutral pronoun usage.
Dr. M. Young. They're the foremost expert on colony collapse disorder and a pretty sick ukulele player if you happen to follow them on the socials.
And from what I could count, there were 3 homosexual relationships, which felt a little excessive.
Anything for love, guys. Happy for you both. Beth, what's up? You here with Gloria?
My girlfriend's in Paris.
As mentioned earlier, while I did enjoy the Harlem cultural missions, it did start feeling like the writers were laying it on pretty thick with all the inclusivity. As far as positive content is concerned, I think the game does do a good job of portraying both education and hard work positively. I also appreciated the way that many of the friendships and relationships were shown throughout the game. ESRB rated the game teen, which I think is reasonable given the violence. The messages of the game were generally biblical and portray superheroes with good values. For more analysis on the themes of the game, check out my biblical themes videos for this game. Overall, I'm going to give the game 4 stars for spiritual value. I'm a little torn on the cost of Spider-Man 2. On the one hand, I felt like it did a really good job on the time cost. For the time poor, the main quest can be finished in about 17 hours, which is quite accessible. For the time rich, it took me about 20 hours or so, with me completing most of the story side missions. If you wanted to collect all the collectibles, there's probably another 3 to 5 hours of defeating enemy bases, collecting prowler stashes, and other activities, most of which I did not bother to do unless it was really on the way. I really appreciated how the web wings help traversal even more, and go really well with web slinging, help you to traverse some of the longer distances without buildings. I didn't like how the fast travel was locked behind doing open world activities and side missions. When fast travel is readily accessible, that makes me more likely to do open world content. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 retails for $59.99 USD, which feels fair, but not great. That's not really the game's fault. It does feel like a quality AAA game, but in my opinion, AAA prices are still kind of high. Overall, based on the content value, narrative accessibility, and asking price, I'm going to give the game 3 stars for cost. Marvel's Spider-Man 2 is a worthy successor to the first 2 entries, expanding the gameplay, making great quality of life improvements, and just giving players a generally great time pretending they are Spider-Man for a few hours. I liked how the science and education was better integrated into the game, and the story is quite solid even if it's not as strong as the first game. I'm kind of disappointed that the game went so strongly on the progressive values and contained fewer references to God and Christianity than the previous games.
Bless you, Spider-Man!
Even though I think the first game was better overall, based on the criteria discussed in the video, I subjectively assign Marvel Spider-Man 2 the rating of priority purchase. That's all I have for you in this video. Bless you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If this video blessed you in some way, please consider watching some of my other videos, subscribing, or sharing with me some of your thoughts in the comments below.